calibrate in a certain way to benefit the Iranian economy, okay? So what I mean by that is that the military is strategically controlling the Strait of Hormuz so that Chinese ships can pass, right? Because Chinese ships are the main buyer of Iranian oil. Also, if you're willing to play ball like Japan or Qatar or Oman, they will also let your ships pass, okay? So this is being strategic. Politically, the Iranians are trying to split the Gulf states, right? They know that Saudi Arabia and UAE are committed to regime change in Iran, but they know that Qatar, Bahrain, Qatar and Oman are on the other side, okay? So they're trying to gain as much global leverage as possible within the GCC. And the narrative is they're trying to shape global opinion and trying to make everyone believe that they are on the right side of history. And most people believe that. In fact, you have a lot of Americans who are rooting for the Iranians to win, all right? So this is a very different, these are two very different strategies. All right, so let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both strategies. Okay, so from the American perspective, the fact that you have this approach of making the world conform to your military strategy basically means that you lack what we call reflection, okay? Meaning that you're not able to sit down with your strategists and discuss how this war is going and how to make changes. But the Iranians are able to do so because the military has to conform to the economic, political, and narrative strategies, okay? Second is flexibility. And what I mean by that is the military strategy, if it's not going well for the Americans, they lack the capacity to reflect and make changes. So what they do is they double down, okay? They accelerate the process of bombing in Iraq, even though it's probably not getting them anywhere. Also, much more importantly, the Americans will choose much more self-destructive, desperate strategies, such as sending ground troops. It is possible by this weekend, ground troops will be sent into Iran, which most military analysts believe to be either countereffective or suicidal, okay? The Iranians, on the other hand, can adapt their military strategy to the economic and political realities, okay? So for example, what they're doing now is they're charging tolls to cross the Strait of Hormuz, okay? And the third difference is the idea of resilience. So, in other words, if you make the world and America conform to your military strategy, they won't support you. That means that if you're losing troops and you're losing equipment, it is very hard to replenish, resupply. Whereas the complete opposite in Iran, where because they are winning popular opinion, because their economy is becoming stronger in this process, because they're winning more political allies, they can actually draw on more support from the population, and they can also recruit foreign fighters and foreign support, foreign sympathy for their cause, okay? So for these reasons, I believe that America is losing this war and that ultimately this war will be lost. When this will happen, we don't know, because America is an empire and they can actually drag us on for at least 20 years, all right? Okay, so now that we've discussed why America will probably lose this war, I want to now shift our focus to discuss how the world will change because of this war. What does the end of this war look like? And to do that, what's really important is to go back to our model of how the world works, okay? So remember, last week we discussed the structure of the world. And at the very core is the empire. Because the empire provides the muscle, the military might, to shape the contours of reality, okay? And then with the empire, you have the finance. Okay? Finance includes City of London, Wall Street, Bank of International Settlements, and asset managers. And they are the game masters, okay? Okay, the empire is the muscle, but the finance are the ones who actually set the game. And then this creates the global economy, which is based on the US dollar, right? But you can't actually have people believing that this is the way the game is structured, because then people won't want to play the game. So what you do is you create an additional layer of multilateral organizations, what the Americans like to call the rules-based international order, including the UN and the WTO, okay, and other organizations. But this makes people believe that the way the world is structured is fair, open, and transparent. And you hide the finance and the empire behind multilateral organizations, okay? And then to justify this system, you have the culture, education, and media, which then creates the different legal infrastructure of different nations and the values as well. Okay? So this is how the world is organized. We also discuss how there are these organizations that are above the nation state, that are above the system in order to benefit from the system, to keep it going, but also to extract rent from it. And these include intelligence, crime, and science. We also discuss how the organizing forces behind intelligence, crime, and science are transnational capital, secret societies, as well as elite families. And we discuss how they are bound together by a concept called the occult, which we'll study later on, okay? But the idea of the occult, okay? So this is the structure of the world. Now, once this world is created, what you need to understand is that the people in the different spheres who benefit from the system, first and foremost, their interest is maintaining that status quo, okay? So their interest is in maintaining the status quo. All right? So basically, they want the system to continue. The problem with the system is, at the core is an empire that will probably lose the war in Iran. And this creates a problem, because if the empire falls, then it's possible that this entire edifice falls as well. So the only solution is to replace the empire, the American empire, with another empire, all right? That is able to provide the muscle for this system. And this empire, I've argued in the past, is of course Israel. And this is what we call Pax Judaica. Okay? So, on the surface, it seems like this war is one between the United States and Iran. But in reality, what this war really is about is a war between the United States and Israel, where the American empire has become corrupt, incompetent, and arrogant. And so now Israel sees an opportunity to replace the American empire in the system. And it's something that eventually every aspect of the system will agree to do. All right? So the main outcome of this war, when it ends, is that Israel will replace America in the Middle East. Okay? All right. So let me first discuss why the American empire is falling. Okay? And the main reason is the idea of something called the military industrial complex. So, for most of its history, America did not have a professional army. Why? Because the founding fathers and most American citizens believed that if there's a standing army, if there's a professional army, that's a direct threat to the liberty of the Americans, okay? Because the Americans fought a war, the Revolutionary War, to get rid of the professional army that was the British. Okay, so Americans do not like a professional army. But in order to fight World War I and World War II, they didn't have a choice but to create a standing army. The problem is that after America won World War II, the apparatus stayed. And the apparatus wanted to maintain the status quo, meaning they wanted access to unlimited government funds. So this led to the Cold War, and the Cold War was a justification for the MIC, the military-industrial complex, to get as much government funding as possible. And the blue, as you can see, is government expenditures. Okay, we can understand why they spent all this money in World War II, because they were fighting a war to save America and to save the world. But as you can see, even though it dropped drastically at the end of the war, starting with the Cold War, you have this uptick, okay? And then you have the Vietnam War. And then after America won the Cold War, you saw this massive uptick. And this is something called the War on Terror. So the military-industrial complex is always looking to start wars in order to justify its existence. So there's a very famous journalist named Julian Assange, and he said this about America. The point is not to have successful wars. The point is not to win wars. The point is to have never-ending wars, which allows the military-industrial complex to transfer American taxpayer money to a transnational elite. Okay, it's basically the point of wars is for the military-industrial complex to steal as much money as possible from America. Okay. America spends a lot of money in its military. Okay, America accounts for 41% of all global military spending. Who's next? China. China spends 8.2%. Russia, which is America's main military enemy, only spends 4.1%. Okay? Meaning that Russia spends 1/10 the amount of money that America spends.